I'm going to speak today. The main focus of this video is going to be very simple. Taking one of these and disassembling it with one of these. I know 3 techniques to get a dice out of this, and if you watch some of my earlier video, I completely had forgotten that I had put that up about 4 years ago, and it was called Frenching one. We're going to modify that just a little bit in our 3rd technique. But before we go on, I'm going to talk about knife cuts. I'm going to post these in the comments. These are the basic knife cuts that you're going to see in any restaurant. Batonnet, Julienne, Brunoise, Macedoinne, Parmentier, and Carre. These dices, of course, little tiny squares, starting from an 1/8 inch all the way up to 3/4 of an inch. You can do the metric conversion yourself for you metrically minded people. The Batonnet and the Julienne. The Julienne you're going to see more often, however, the Batonnet, that's French fries. So I'm taking off the blossom end. The root end is pretty nice. I'm going to leave it on. If you get those with a lot of roots coming out, trim them off. They just keep your cutting board a little bit cleaner. I'm going to peel off the outer layer. Outer leaf is usually a little bit dried out, a little leathery and stuff like that. So I'm going to peel that off and we'll get that out of here. And the same for the top half. Clean up a little bit. From this point is where I'm going to show you the rest of the 3 techniques. Follow along. So this technique, it's very simple. This is the traditional way. You talk to the tall hat people with the black slacks, aka chefs, classically trained chefs, they're going to say this is the only way. So you start off with several horizontal slices, these ones, and several vertical slices, these ones. So you go across and then down. And then you turn it sideways and cut along. Technique number 1. First we make horizontal slices. Looks like 2 is good for this, for the size of cut I'm going to make. Then you make vertical slices down through the onion. Then come through and slice off the ends, and you get a nice dice. The second technique, I'm going to cut in at an angle, at different various angles, and then I'll get kind of like a star pattern. I'm going to cut down towards the center, and then I'm going to slice it sideways. Technique 2, I make radial cuts down towards the center. And then slice the dice off of it. The third technique, I'm going to turn it sideways. I'm going to trim off the end, and then I'm going to make slices parallel to the end cuts. Then I'm going to turn it sideways, And I'm going to cut down in very similar to Frenching, if you see my Frenching video, Frenching an onion, but it will give me a dice. Technique number 3, I'm going to cut off the root end. Then I'm going to make parallel slices to the end cuts. Looks like 5 is a good number for this one, for the size of dice I'm looking for. Then I'm going to turn it sideways, and then just like in the previous technique, I'm going to make radial cuts down into the onion. As you can see, this technique is a little sloppy, but it works. As with every technique, there's going to be advantages and disadvantages. So let's talk about them. Traditional. One biggest advantage, it's going to be mostly consistent. That's why it's traditional. That's why all the French chefs are going to say this is the only way to do it. It's fine. The second technique, radial. I find this to be actually safer. The reason why I say this is safer is because these cuts here, the horizontal cuts, you have to hold sometimes a wet, slimy onion and be able to make knives in towards your body. If you don't have the sharpest of sharp knives, you could accidentally go through it. It's just harder to control those cuts, and that's why I don't like it. This, again, coming down like these into this. The only problem with this is that it's an inconsistent cut size. Just by the design, it is inconsistent. Because cuts out here on the end of the onion are going to be bigger naturally than those on the smaller. So it depends on what you're doing. You know, if you're going to be sauteing vegetables a la minute and you needed consistent sized onions, traditional. That's going to give you the most traditional side. This, however, it's faster. There's less cuts. It gives you a decent consistency, but not the greatest. This cut. It's very sloppy. It's very inconsistent, but it's also very, very fast. And the reason why I like this cut is primarily for soups and stews, where your onions are going to be cooking, or your vegetables and stuff like that are going to be cooking for a long, long time. It doesn't matter if they are consistent sizes, unless of course you're one of the tall hat with the white jacket and the black pants type people. Those people, it is concerned. In a restaurant type scenario, I want the most consistent cut as possible because I want every bite to look the same. So in this, if I'm doing a rustic dish at home or something like that, this is the technique I'm going to use. If I want something more consistent, I'm going to use that radial technique. That's a lot of onions. Start by adding a little olive oil. Our onions. This is all on medium-low. Because what we're doing here is we're sweating these onions. It'll take a few minutes. We're gonna add a little salt and pepper first though. We'll let that go for a few minutes. So now that we've got all the ingredients in, we're going to bring up the temperature and we're going to let this cook and pretty much boil down to a syrupy consistency. We are almost there. This is what I'm looking for. Most of the liquid is absorbed or evaporated off. The onions are almost see-through. Now remember that it's still kind of loose, but it is going to tighten up when it cools. And we're going to take this off and cool it now. There are more than one way to skin a cat, and there's more than one way to chop up an onion. Each one has their advantage. One is more consistent, others are faster. It depends on what you're using it for. If you're doing a big stew type thing, you don't need to worry about consistency. Unfortunately, I would love to tell you how long it took to cook this bacon onion marmalade, but the old girl just didn't have it in her today, and she was having some issues. So what's this good with? This is good on beef, it's great on chicken, the duck confit we did a few weeks ago, and it's even good on pork tenderloin. So enjoy. I'll see you next week. If you like what you saw, go ahead, like, subscribe, and enjoy.